On my last day of high school, I thought the most that was going to happen was the crowd screaming, throwing paper up, and maybe someone crying hidden in the bathroom. The school had that strange end-of-cycle weather, everyone kind of excited and tired at the same time. Classes had ended early, and I was sitting with two more classmates near the side entrance, waiting for my father to come pick me up. That's when the director's voice appeared on the speaker, asking the owner of a black backpack left next to the main gate to pick it up at the reception. But the way he spoke drew attention. You could tell he was uncomfortable. He seemed nervous or tense. At the time I didn't even care much, but after about 10 minutes the warning was repeated. The same backpack in the same place. But this time he said that, if no one went to pick it up, an employee would need to open it to try to identify the owner. No one showed up. And that's when things started to get weird. An inspector came to the outside where we were and called two employees to help take the backpack inside. I was close enough to see at a glance. It was an ordinary backpack, black, half-worn, with the zipper slightly open. But I swear by everything, I had never seen that backpack at school. And look, after 3 years in that place, we learned to recognize everything, even the backpacks of first-year students. A few minutes later, the movement at the reception began to attract attention. I saw two employees talking low, with a kind of strange expression, as if they were confused or disconcerted. Curious, I approached along with a group that also noticed the weird weather. The door of the coordination room was ajar, and for a second I could see one of the guys taking things out of the backpack with gloves. It was like a keychain with the name of a girl in my class, a case with stickers that I knew belonged to a second-year student, and even an identity card of a boy who studied in the morning. But then came what made my stomach turn, an old badge already faded, with the photo and name of a student who died 3 years earlier. I was paralyzed. I remembered this boy, Mateus. He had died in an accident returning from a school excursion, on one of those chartered buses. It was a tragedy that shook everyone at the time. He was quiet, good people, and everyone got sick for weeks. The strangest thing is that everything that was inside that backpack was recent. The objects of the current students were there, in good condition. Nothing had a sign of dust, mold, or weather. And then came the question, how did a badge of a student who died years ago end up there in the middle, with things from people who still study there? I was waiting for someone to comment that it was a bad joke, or that maybe they had found the badge in some old closet. But no one said anything, and the director closed the door. I stood there for a while, trying to understand what was happening, but soon they told us to leave the coordination entrance. They said it was internal matter, and that the students should already be leaving. But you could see that the employees were lost. Some teachers seemed to know nothing, others were visibly uncomfortable, as if they were pretending that it was normal. On the way to the main gate, I commented to a colleague about what I had seen. He widened his eyes and said, "Man, Mateus wore a black backpack exactly like that." At the time, my skin got goosebumps all over. We were silent until he left. I didn't know what else to think. Everything seemed so wrong, so out of the ordinary, but no one there was treating it as something serious. When I got home, still a little shocked, I went to look for old photos from the time when Mateus was studying with us. I found one from the student guild, with him in the background. And yes, he had a black backpack on his lap. Just like it. The same worn handle, the same crooked zipper. That backpack, without a doubt, had been his. But how? How did she show up there, out of nowhere, on the last day of school, with objects from students who are still alive? That kept me awake. I spent the night wondering if that had been some kind of absurd coincidence, or if someone had set everything up. But the more I thought, the less explanation I could find. The next day, I tried to ask about the backpack in the school group, but no one answered. As if, suddenly, the subject had disappeared from everyone's memory. In the following days, I contacted a friend whose father works in the school secretariat a few times. I asked in the hard face what had happened to that backpack. He took a long time, but ended up sending me a kind of vague message. It's gone. No one knows where it ended up. And after that, he stopped answering. That only made me more horny. What do you mean it disappeared? Didn't anyone stay with her? Not even the objects were returned. I'm not the conspiratorial type, but all that started to seem purposely muffled to me. The school simply pretended it never happened. The employees stopped commenting, and the students began to forget or pretend they forgot. But I can't. I saw it with my own eyes, and there's no way to erase that from memory. Today, when I remember that last day of school, I can't think of goodbyes, hugs, or jokes. I only remember that backpack. from that feeling that something had come back, for some reason. We'll never know who put it there, nor how the objects ended up inside. But I'm pretty sure it wasn't just a forgotten backpack. It was a warning, a reminder that there are stories that we think are over, but not over. And you? Have you ever seen something too common, not to be weird? Sometimes what seems forgotten is just waiting for the right time to reappear. This happened on the last day of school of the third year, and to this day no one knows how to properly explain what happened. We were already in that end-of-cycle vibe, without paying much attention to anything, just waiting to give the time to leave and never return to that building. The last classes had been canceled or were empty because the teachers did not show up, which was common at that time. But that afternoon, they put us in the classroom saying that there was going to be a replacement with a substitute teacher. Nobody cared much. We thought it was just some coordination guy wanting to fill in the workload. The strange thing is that he was already in the room when we arrived, standing in front of the blackboard, without touching anything. The first strange thing was that he already knew everyone's name. He didn't even ask. When everyone entered the room, he greeted by name, as if he were someone who had been living with the class for months. But we had never seen that guy before. He was thin, tall, with dark hair and a kind of neutral expression, the kind that you can't tell if he's angry or bored. And he spoke slowly, as if choosing each word. He started the class saying that he was not going to teach content, but that he wanted to talk to the class about important decisions. Until then, okay. But he started asking too many personal questions. Like, why do you still talk to that person even though you know they hurt you? Or, do you regret not having told the truth that night? And all looking straight into each one's eye. At the time, no one knew if it was some bizarre emotional dynamic or just a teacher with a weird method. But the atmosphere in the room began to weigh quickly. A colleague of mine, Bruno, turned pale when the guy said something about his father, something he never commented on to anyone at school. I saw his reaction. It was real. He was stuck, looking at nothing. And then I realized that it wasn't just with him. Every question the guy asked seemed to poke something specific in each student. I started to get uncomfortable. When it was my turn, he looked at me for a few seconds and just said, "You're still afraid of what happened in 2017, right?" I swear my heart stopped for a second. Because in 2017 something happened in my family that only my parents and a cousin know. Nothing that had come out on social media or that anyone from the school knew. But he knew. The class followed like this, a growing discomfort. No one dared to get up or leave. It seemed that everyone had been hypnotized by that guy, but not in a mystical way. It was as if he knew exactly where to poke. In the end, he just said, "Some of you will still have time to change. Others not so much," and left the room as if nothing had happened. We sat in silence for a while, until the inspector appeared saying it was time to leave. I asked her what the teacher's name was, and she made a confused face. "What teacher?" I explained everything, and she said that at that time there was no substitute scheduled, that, by the way, the last class had been officially canceled. I went straight to the coordination to ask if that was any surprise activity, some combined lecture, anything. The coordinator opened the system and showed me the schedule of the day. The last class of our class had really been canceled. There was no record of a substitute teacher. No name written down, no badge issued, nothing. I insisted. I said that he was there, that he used the blackboard, that he talked to the whole class. She only replied with a suspicious look. The room was closed until just now. I came home with my head spinning and started texting in the living room group. Some colleagues responded. Others didn't even want to talk about it. But everyone confirmed that they lived the same thing. The guy was there, and what he said to each one was too personal to be a coincidence. What upset me the most is that no one remembers his face exactly. We can describe the shape, the hair, even the clothes, but the face, when I try to pull from memory, is as if it were blurry. A strange feeling, as if my head blocked the details. The following days, I tried to forget. I was convinced that maybe it was some external professional who passed without registration, even with everything saying otherwise. But then last week, a colleague posted an old photo of a school fair from 5 years ago. And in the corner of the image, he was there, standing in the background the same way, seriously standing still watching the class. And at that time, none of us remembered him either. After seeing that photo, everything collapsed for good in my head. Because if he was already there before, years before, and no one noticed, then what exactly is he? And why did it show up again, just on our last day of school? I started to think that maybe that class wasn't to teach anything, but to observe or judge. Some people in the class went through very heavy situations after that day. There were people who had an accident, others got away from everything, and some simply disappeared from the networks. It could be a coincidence. It can be. But after that last day, nothing seems like just a coincidence. His presence was real, the questions were real. And what he left in everyone's head, too. Until today, no one has found out who that man was. No employee recognizes, no record was found, and his name never appeared anywhere. But everyone who was in that room remembers the feeling. From the silence. From the shame that hit after each question. From the impression that he knew more about us than ourselves. What if, at some point in your life, someone appeared out of nowhere and pointed out exactly what you tried to hide the most? Sometimes those who show up to teach a class didn't come to teach anything. On the last day of school, while most of the guys were just thinking about putting on the t-shirt, signing the uniforms, and taking the last pictures in the corridors, I just wanted to go to my closet to get some books and leave. I've never been very attached to school, so I wasn't exactly thrilled with that end. My closet was number 213, near the back exit, and I always left some things there. An old coat, a sketchbook, some loose notes. But when I got to him, I came across something that stuck me for a few seconds. My name, which was written on white adhesive tape on the outside, had been scratched hard. And instead, they wrote another name. A name I had never seen before. Elias. At the time, I thought it was a joke from someone in the class. But no one there knew anyone with that name, and I also didn't remember any Elias studying in that building in recent years. I tried to tear off the scratched tape, but it looked like they had glued it on top with some weird glue, more sticky than usual. That's when I opened the closet, and the scare was worse. Inside the door, there were several messages scribbled with a black pen. Some smaller, others larger, most written as if they were notes. I saw you today on the stairs. You always come in at exactly 7:12 a.m. Why do you pretend that everything is fine when you sit in the back? They were strange messages, kind of obsessive. But the worst, some said things that no one knew. Things I've never told anyone. I kept reading each of those messages with a chill that went up the spine. One of them said, "You never look up when you cross the courtyard, but I look." Another said, "That story of your brother is no secret, I know what happened." At the time, I dropped the closet door as if it was on fire. That gave me a horrible feeling, as if someone had been watching me for weeks, writing down every detail of my life. I had never said anything about my brother to anyone at school. It was something I kept locked inside me. How could anyone know that? I felt my whole body tremble, and suddenly the school, which was full of laughter and noise, seemed to be mute, as if all the sound had disappeared for a few seconds. I called a friend to see. He laughed, thought it was some heavy joke, but when he read the messages, he stopped laughing at the time. He said that was too weird, that even he didn't know about some things written there. We started looking around, to see if there was anyone looking at us, but there was no one in the hallway. We asked the others if they knew someone named Elias, and the answer was always no. The worst thing is that while I was there with the closet open, I noticed a last message on the inside of the door, written in a stronger way, almost scratched with anger. "You are not the owner of this." It was at that moment that an icy chill ran through my body. That wasn't a joke anymore. After that, I went straight to the coordination. I showed the closet, the messages, and asked if any student named Elias had already studied there. The girl at the reception was kind of wondering what to say. He called another older employee, who took a look at the numbering of the cabinets and became thoughtful. After a few minutes, he said something that left me stuck. He said that, years ago, Closet 213 was used by a student named Elias who was studying at night, but that he had disappeared in the middle of the semester, without warning, without anyone understanding properly. Not even the family showed up to give satisfaction. They only found out after he had moved to the city. According to the employee, after that the closet was closed for a long time. It was only used again the following year by me. I went back to the closet with a lump in my throat. I opened it again, as if I expected to find something new in there. And I found it. A folded paper at the bottom, which wasn't there before. It was a notebook sheet with a single sentence written, "Now you understand why I watched it." My hand was shaking. I knew I had closed that closet earlier. I knew that paper wasn't there before. Suddenly the whole school seemed wrong to me, as if something invisible was in every corner watching me. I closed the closet, pulled out the name written on top of mine, and left without looking back. I just wanted to get out of there. And to this day, I don't know if that Elias really left, or if he stayed there, quiet, watching the next owner of the closet. I didn't go back to that school after that day. I delivered the last papers by email and asked someone else to take my history. That feeling of being watched stayed with me for weeks. I had nightmares about the closet, with the name being crossed out, with the door opening by itself. I could never look at these simple details, like a closet or a ticket, the same way. What scares me to this day is the fact that someone or something knew parts of my life that not even my family knows. Things that were kept only inside my head. And somehow they were written there, as if they were being followed since the first day of school. To this day I don't know if this Elias really existed, if he was just someone obsessed, or if something was stuck there inside that closet. But I learned one thing: there are places that absorb what happens in them. And sometimes, it's not you who chooses what you take back home. It's the place that chooses what you leave with you. And you? Have you ever felt that someone was watching you, even when there was no one around? Maybe the right question is, who was the real owner of the closet? On the last day of school, they were distributing the class yearbooks. That photo book with the best moments of the year, signatures, forced tributes, and those cliché phrases about friendship. Everyone was excited to see the photos, subscribe to colleagues' pages, laugh at the Mikos recorded during school events. I took mine without much excitement, sat on the patio and started flipping through, going straight through the obvious parts. But when I got to the final pages, I noticed a strange thing. Deep down, after the thank you part and the list of graduates, there was a page that shouldn't be there. It was a picture of me, sleeping, on the living room's desk, lying with his face turned to the wall. And the worst, taken from an angle that no one could reach inside that room. At the time, I thought it was a montage or some bad joke. But the print was professional, just like the other photos in the yearbook. The caption only said, "Scotten Moments." That freezed me. I started showing it to my colleagues, and then came the most bizarre part. It wasn't just me. A girl in my class found a picture of her crying in the bathroom. She swore she was alone that day. Another guy found a picture of him kneeling on the empty court, at a time when he had gone there to think after a fight. All the photos were in loose pages, different for each student, hidden there at the end. None of those images were public. None had been authorized. And apparently no one knew they existed. The whole school started to get into a strange mood. The coordinator, when she was confronted by a group of students, became visibly nervous. He said that the printer had only received the official photos, that no one from the team had included extra images. And he also stated that the final material had been reviewed before printing, and that those pages did not exist in the approved version. Even so, they were there, each student with a different page, an intimate photo, at a time that was not supposed to be recorded. The thing got even weirder when they discovered that the digital files sent to the printing company did not contain any of the images that were in the printed yearbooks. The photos simply appeared. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at my own image for hours. I remembered the day I fell asleep in the living room. It was any Tuesday, right after history class. The room was almost empty, and I remember being alone for a few minutes before the signal rang. But there was no one with a cell phone, nor a possible angle to get that image. The window behind me wouldn't open, and the front door was locked. So who took that? I started to wonder if there were hidden cameras, some kind of espionage, I don't know. But the school has never been equipped with this type of technology. And then came the part that gave me the most goosebumps. I noticed that, in the reflection of the glass of the blackboard, there was a shadow behind me. Someone over there. Stop. Invisible at the moment, but present in the photo. The next day, the management collected all the yearbooks by mistake of printing. They said that a new version would be delivered later, corrected. But no one ever received anything else. They disappeared with everyone, as if they wanted to erase that from existence. Some students managed to hide theirs, but most gave them with fear of punishment. I kept mine, not out of attachment, but because I wanted to understand what had happened. I started comparing the extra photos with the times and dates we remembered, and I realized a pattern. Almost all of them had been taken in moments of fragility. People crying, napping, isolated, with lost expression. Always in silence, as if someone had chosen the most vulnerable moments of each one to capture. I told this to a closer teacher, who seemed to be already suspicious of something. She was silent for a while, then said something that left me without reaction. In 2009, something similar happened. But at that time they were tickets. According to her, more than 10 years ago, students began to find personal messages inside the lockers, handwritten, describing intimate things. Nothing has been proven. The school was stuffy, and now, again, images appearing out of nowhere. I had the feeling that it wasn't new. It was just a different manifestation of the same thing, as if the school or something in it was watching us all the time, and from time to time showed that it never stopped looking. I kept the yearbook inside a box at the bottom of my bedroom closet. I've tried to throw it away a few times, but I always end up giving up. I don't know if it's fear or curiosity, but a part of me feels that it's not over yet. Sometimes, when I pass near the school, I feel a discomfort difficult to explain, as if something from there had still held me somehow. We never found out who took the photos. No employee, photographer, or student who took responsibility never appeared. And the strangest thing, at graduation they took a general photo of the class, and deep down, leaning against the wall, there was someone that no one recognized. Neither in the lists nor in the records. It only appeared in the photo, and no one remembers seeing him that day. Since then, I avoid opening the yearbook. But from time to time, I look at that last page, the one I'm sleeping in, with the shadow behind me. And I always get the feeling that if I look too long, that shadow will be closer than last time. And you? Have you ever seen yourself in a photo you didn't remember taking? Sometimes the camera doesn't capture what we want. It captures what's really there. It was on the last day of school that this happened, as if the school had saved it to show only when everything was ending. Me and 3 other friends were waiting for the van after class. They're near the back exit, where almost no one passes. That corner has always had a strange atmosphere, half-dark corridor, peeling wall, and an old wooden door that everyone said was locked for years. Some said that the old infirmary worked there, before the renovation. Others said it was just an abandoned warehouse. The fact is that no one had ever seen such an open door. But that day she was ajar. The kind of opening that seems purposeful, as if it were drawing attention. The first reaction was that mixture of curiosity and fear. A friend of mine told me to leave it alone, that it was probably like this because of some maintenance. But we knew that no one had been moving that corner for centuries. It was visible by the mold, by the bush growing in the corners. I approached slowly and pushed the door. She creaked loudly, and the smell inside was strong, a mixture of old thing, expired disinfectant, and something metallic. The light that came from outside barely illuminated the space, but you could see a wheelchair overturned on the floor, some rusty iron cabinets, and scattered papers. Everything seemed stopped in time. It was as if no one had been there in decades. And even so, it seemed too recent. We entered slowly, half silently, each looking to the side. The lockers were full of old folders with handwritten labels, student names, dates, medical codes. I took one of them and opened it out of curiosity, and there were files with notes of attendance, reports, some even with small tapped photos. Heavy thing, as if it were a medical file that no one should have access to. Most of the records were from many years ago, but one of them had the name of a student in my class. That stood me. He wasn't someone with health problems, and he never said anything serious to anyone. When I showed the file to one of my friends, he turned pale. "This shouldn't be here," he said. And then we heard it, a dry noise, coming from the back of the room, as if something had hit a wall. Everyone froze. One of the iron cabinets was leaning against a smaller, lower door, like those of technical access, only with a lock on the inside. We hadn't even noticed her before, and it was from this door that the sound came. My other friend hit his hand lightly, and answered another hit, this time harder, as if someone were in there. But it didn't make sense. The door was locked inside. No employee knew we were there. And officially no one has used that space for years. The only thing that came to mind was, either someone got stuck, or there was something there that never came out. We started arguing right there, if we called someone or if we ran away. But deep down, none of us wanted to admit that we were terrified. My friend tried to force the smaller door, but there was no handle, just a slit through which the sound barely passed. He even bent down and asked, "Is there anyone there?" But there was no answer. Until we heard something else, a breath. Slow, heavy, as if someone were leaning against the other side of the wood. That's when the real panic hit. We left the room quickly, without looking back. The main door was still ajar, the way we found it. When we passed by her back to the courtyard, everything seemed darker, as if the time inside had passed differently. We came back the next day, kind of without combining, just to see if the door was still open. But when we got there, it seemed like it had never been touched. There was a thick chain with a padlock, the kind that wasn't there the day before. We took pictures, tried to pull nothing. We went to the board to ask about that space, and the answer was dry. Depot closed since 1998. No one goes in there. When we talked about what we saw, they looked at us as if it were a joke. But we knew. We felt it. That inside wasn't just a forgotten thing. There was some presence there. Something that heard us, that answered. Something that, for some reason, wanted us to enter, just that day. Since then, we have never touched on the subject between us. It wasn't out of shame or fear of looking crazy. It was because everyone felt the same thing. If we talked too much, it could come back. One of my friends even changed schools the following semester. He said that the atmosphere was too heavy. The others stopped passing near the back exit. I myself, to this day, dream of that noise of the chair turned, with the breath on the other side of the door. Sometimes I wake up with the feeling that I'm still inside that room, as if I hadn't left it completely. As if a part of me was still inside, trapped along with whatever was waiting in that darkness. What scares me the most is not what we saw, but what we didn't see. That lock inside. That answer from the other side. That medical record with my colleague's name. None of this made sense. And maybe I'll never do it. Have you ever entered a place that seemed too forgotten, but felt that you were not alone? Some doors are closed for a reason. The mistake is when they open up. School has always seemed less scary to me than people say, even at night. I had already stayed up late several times because of rehearsal, meeting, cultural fair. But on that last day of graduation rehearsal, I swear I felt the school in a different way. It was as if she were alive. The rehearsal ended around 7 in the evening. Most of the class left quickly, excited, laughing loudly through the corridors. I stayed a little longer, helping the sound people to put away the equipment in the auditorium. When I finished, everyone had already gone. The courtyard was empty, and the only sound I could hear was my own step echoing on the ceramic floor. Strangely, the lights were on only in some corridors, as if someone had started to turn everything off before the time. When I turned the corridor that led to the main exit, I saw the lights go out one by one. Man, as if they were turning off in sequence from back to front. I thought it was the janitor closing everything, but then I realized it didn't make sense. It wasn't the closing time yet. And from where I was, you could see that the security room was dark. There was no one there. The school was completely empty. I went back to the main corridor faster, and that's when I noticed something else. All the doors were closed. Locked. Including the emergency ones, which are usually just leaning against them. I started walking faster, with that discomfort growing in my chest, until I heard a whistle. Low, continuous. Coming from the bottom of the corridor. The sound was too calm for the context. It didn't look like someone playing or trying to scare. It was that kind of whistle that we hear when someone is distracted, expecting something, or someone. The problem is that I knew there was no one else there. I walked slowly, trying to convince myself that it was some security guard, but there was no flashlight, no light coming from the other side, only the sound and darkness. When I got close to the main door, I pushed hard, nothing. Locked. I went to the side, tried another exit. Also locked. I started knocking, calling, but no one showed up. The school seemed completely deaf. And the whistle continued. Closer now. I started walking fast back to the courtyard, trying to understand if that was a prank, some bad joke. But it didn't make sense. Everyone had already left, and the gates were closed. And then, when I passed in front of the art room, I saw something through the reflection of the window, a silhouette. Stop at the end of the corridor, motionless. Dark, long, as if it were waiting. But the worst thing wasn't even that, it was the sound. The whistle stopped, and started again, but now it didn't come from far away. It came from the school speaker, as if someone were inside the direction room, transmitting through the internal system. But that room was also locked. That freezed me to the bone. I ran to the steering door, even though I knew it was locked. I tried to open it, I called, nothing. The school was dark, and the presence sensors, which always turned on the lights when someone passed by, just didn't work. I went through 3 corridors in total pitch, and then I heard another sound, different from the whistle, steps. Not in a hurry, not even running. Calm, rhythmic steps, as if someone were walking without haste, but following me. I tried to stay calm, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I ran into the teacher's room, locked myself, and stood there, leaning against the door, listening to the steps approaching. They stopped right in front of the room, but no one hit. They just stayed there, for long minutes. When the silence finally returned, I left slowly, praying for one of the external doors to be unlocked. And without explanation, the side door of the kitchen, which was previously locked, was ajar. I left almost tripping in a hurry. I went straight to the gate, and luckily for me it was still leaning, without a padlock. I left without looking back. The next day, I went back to school to get a document, and asked the janitor who had closed everything so early. He looked at me strangely and replied, "No one closed. We only lock everything after 8. When I told him what happened, he turned pale. I just said, "It's happened before." And you? Have you ever been the last to leave somewhere? And did you have the impression that you were not alone? I've been a teacher for almost 20 years, and I've seen everything in the classroom. But what happened on that last day of school still haunts me. It was a Friday late afternoon. Classes were over, the students were already leaving, and I stayed a little longer at school organizing some late exams. My room was locked, as always. The key stays with me, and no one other than the coordination has a copy. When I returned there around 5:30 to get my materials and leave, I realized that there was something written on the board, with white chalk, right in the center. It was a list. Names. Only names. Written with a strange, irregular letter, as if someone had written fast or with a trembling hand. At the time, I thought it was some kind of student joke, but the more I read the names, the stranger the thing got. The list was not random. They were the names of my students from the 8th grade class, but not all. There were some who were attending normally, others who had moved and no longer studied there. And one of them, the last name on the list, was Camila's. Camila had died in a car accident in the first semester. The whole school was in shock at the time. Her name was there, under all the others, written the same way. I looked around, but the room was empty, exactly as I had left it. No sign of burglary, open window, nothing. And even so, that list appeared there. I deleted the board on the spot, kind of on impulse, as if it would also disappear from my head. But it didn't help. The image on that list was hammering. When I got home, I tried to remember if, by chance, someone had used my room that day. I sent a message to the teachers' group, and no one knew anything. I discreetly asked the coordination the next day. They said that the room was locked all the time, as always. I closed myself before the break, and only came back in the late afternoon. There was no way someone could have entered without a key. Still, someone or something came in and wrote names on the board. Very specific names. The next day, I talked to a student in the class, trying to bring up the subject lightly. I asked if she or someone in the room had made any jokes with the blackboard. She kept looking at me with a strange face, and then said, "We haven't entered your room since Wednesday, teacher. It was locked up." I insisted a little more, and she seemed uncomfortable. Then she said something that stuck me inside. "Gabby saw Camila in the hallway yesterday. She said she thought it was someone similar, but she even smiled. Then it disappeared." That knocked me down. It wasn't just the name on the board. It was as if Camila's presence, or something that bore her name, was still there. I didn't know what to think, but a certainty began to grow inside me. That list was not random. On Sunday night, I went back to school alone. I took the key to the room with the security guard saying that I needed to get some material. I entered with a tight heart, but determined to understand that. I turned on the lights, went to the blackboard, and by reflex I ran my hand on the surface. It was clean. But when I looked closely, you could still see the light mark of the names, as if the chalk had penetrated deeper into the board. I took the eraser and passed it again, but it didn't go on. That seemed impregnated. I looked around, and that's when I noticed something else. A chair was out of place. Leaning against the back wall, facing the blackboard, as if someone had been sitting there, watching the list being written. At that moment, the silence of the room became heavy. The kind of silence that is not empty, it is dense. As if there was someone there, standing, waiting. I was frozen for a few seconds, then left quickly, returned the key, and went home without looking back. The next day, the director called a meeting. He said that there was a problem with the school's internal system, and that some cameras had recorded strange movements in locked rooms, including mine. But the files were corrupted. No one could see the images. The school decided, out of nowhere, to change all the locks that week. And about the list, no one else spoke. And you? Have you ever seen your name written somewhere, where you shouldn't be? In our school there was a part that everyone called the Old Wing. It was an older building, glued to the main block, but closed for years. They said that the entire school worked there in the past, before the renovation. It had dark corridors, foggy windows, locked doors, and a disabled elevator that, according to employees, didn't even have power on anymore. But as it was the last day of school, we decided to do what we always said we were going to do. explore. I and 3 other colleagues went there after the exit, through a side passage that almost no one used. The door of the old wing was leaning. We're in. The place smelled of mold, everything was dusty, and the silence was so heavy that we started whispering without realizing it. We got to the elevator, just for fun. It was old, with iron doors that opened to the side. One of us, Leo, pressed the button impulsively, and to our surprise, the light came on. The red button blinked, and the door opened with a dry click. We kept looking at each other, not knowing whether to laud or run away. But, of course, we ended up getting in. We wanted to see how far the joke would go. The panel only showed the normal school floors, ground floor, first and second. But when the door closed, a number 4 appeared, a floor that never existed there. The elevator started to go down, yes, go down, even with the 4 on, and no one squeezed anything. When it stopped, the doors opened, and there in front there was a corridor that none of us had ever seen. The place was different from everything at school. The walls were dark gray, full of stains, and the floor was covered by a kind of fine dust, as if no one had stepped there for decades. The lamps on the ceiling were off, but one or the other flashed weakly, creating shadows that moved with the light. The smell was strange, a mixture of wet stuff, iron and old chemical. We stood there inside the elevator for a few seconds, in silence, trying to understand if that was some kind of set-up scenario, or if we had really ended up in a place that shouldn't exist. Leo was the first to take a step outside. We followed behind. The elevator closed by itself as soon as we left, without anyone pressing anything. We started walking slowly, trying not to make noise. The doors of the rooms were open, but all dark inside. Some had old wallets, others were completely empty. There was a bad feeling in the air, as if we were invading something that was not ours. And then we heard steps, coming from the end of the corridor. I couldn't see anyone, but the steps were there. And then came the worst, a voice. Weak, hoarse but sharp. Calling, Leonardo, Leo's name. At the time, he froze. He looked at us without saying anything, pale. And then the voice repeated, Leonardo, come back here. That wasn't a joke. We started to walk backwards, slowly, as if that would help in something. Leo didn't say anything, he just stared at the bottom of the corridor, where the light flashed irregularly. The voice called again, closer. Leonardo, you forgot. No one there could move properly. It was as if the air was heavy, sticking to the skin. So the noise changed. In addition to the steps, now you could hear something being dragged, as if something big was being pulled off the floor. That's when I lost control and shouted, Let's get out of here now. We ran in the direction of the elevator, which, to our relief, was still there, with the door open. We entered almost pushing ourselves, and Leo was the last to enter, looking back until the last second. When the door closed, the panel showed nothing else. No number, just a faint red glow. We were silent, waiting. The elevator started to go up. When it opened, we were back in the main wing of the school. Normal light, ambient sound of the cleaning lady listening to the radio in the other wing, as if nothing had happened. We went out and swore not to tell anyone. The next day, we tried to go back to the old Ard, but the passage was locked with chains, as if it had never been used. The strangest? Leo started walking strangely after that day. Distant. And a while later, he transferred from school without telling anyone. He just sent us a short message. You heard it too, right? She knew me. And you? Have you ever ended up in a place that simply shouldn't exist?